For over 60 years, America has been told the same story. A lone gunman, a simple motive, a closed case. And every time someone dared to question it, they were labeled a conspiracy theorist, a troublemaker, someone who couldn't just accept reality. But in 2025, something changed, quietly, clinically, buried beneath a news cycle that barely blinked. The United States government released tens of thousands of previously hidden documents surrounding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, files that intelligence agencies fought for decades to keep sealed, files that were never meant to leave classified vaults, files that don't rewrite the official story. They expose something far darker. Not who pulled the trigger, but who controlled the narrative. For more than a half century later, the most powerful intelligence agency in the world has now been caught in their own paperwork, lying, withholding evidence, obstructing investigations, and manipulating what the American people were allowed to know about the murder of their president. And the most disturbing part, this isn't speculation. This is their own documentation. This is Stories from the Vault. I'm Kyle Fields. And tonight, we're not revisiting a conspiracy. We're uncovering a confirmed government cover-up, one that began the moment Kennedy's blood hit the pavement in Dallas. But before we get into that, be sure to like and subscribe, then comment down below what you want to hear about next. November 22nd, 1963, 12:30 p.m. President John F. Kennedy's motorcade moves through Dealey Plaza, the Texas sun reflecting off polished chrome and smiling crowds. The country is watching. The future feels confident. Hope feels tangible. Then, the world fractures. A sharp crack echoes through the plaza. Then another. Then silence so deafening, it becomes history itself. In the span of seconds, America's youngest elected president slumps forward into his seat, fatally wounded. Jacqueline Kennedy reaches toward him in horror. Secret Service agents scramble. The motorcade turns frantic. And the nation begins a lifetime of questions. Within hours, police arrest a former Marine named Lee Harvey Oswald inside a Dallas movie theater. He denies everything. Calm. Almost detached. 2 days later, before any real interrogation, before trial, before testimony, Oswald is shot dead on live television by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. And just like that, the key witness to a murder of a president is silenced. The government moves fast. Maybe too fast. The Warren Commission is created within days. 11 months later, it delivers its conclusion. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. 3 shots, 1 shooter, case closed. The American people are told to move on. But many don't. Witnesses report shots from different directions. Doctors describe wounds that don't match official diagrams. A bullet said to have passed through 2 men emerges nearly pristine. Evidence mysteriously disappears. Autopsies are rushed. Recordings vanish. Files go missing. Still, year after year, we are assured there's nothing more to see. Until now. Because the documents released in 2025 reveal something deeply unsettling. While the public was being told Oswald was an unknown loner, America's intelligence agencies had already been tracking him for years. They were reading his mail, monitoring his movements, recording his communications, and building a detailed file on his every move. Oswald was not invisible. He was being watched. And yet, somehow, the most surveilled man connected to the murder of a president was allowed to move freely, return from the Soviet Union, obtain a rifle, and position himself along the president's route. And that is where the story begins to shift. Because if the CIA and the FBI already knew everything about Lee Harvey Oswald, then the question no longer becomes who killed JFK. It becomes, why did those in power allow it to happen? And what did they hide afterwards? Lee Harvey Oswald was never supposed to be important. That's what they want you to believe. The official narrative frames him as a disgruntled nobody, a failed drifter with delusions of grandeur, a man who snapped and changed history alone. But the newly declassified files tell a very different story, because long before Oswald ever set foot in Dallas, before he ever saw the school book depository in Texas, before he ever pulled a trigger, the CIA already knew his name. In fact, they had been tracking him since 1959. That year, Oswald defected to the Soviet Union, one of the most dangerous moves an American citizen could make during the Cold War. Not only did he defect, he openly offered to provide classified military information to America's greatest enemy. And here's where the story breaks logic entirely. Instead of treating him as a national security threat, instead of imprisoning him, instead of interrogating him as a severe risk, the United States allowed him to return home. No punishment, no charges, no explanation. And when he came back, intelligence agencies didn't lose interest. They intensified surveillance. Oswald's mail was secretly opened and read through a covert CIA operation that monitored over 250,000 Americans. His communications with the Soviet Union were indexed, logged, filed, cross-referenced. By November of 1963, just days before the assassination, CIA counterintelligence chief James Jesus Angleton had compiled a 180-page dossier on Oswald. 180 pages. On a man who supposedly meant nothing. And then there's Mexico City. In late September 1963, Oswald traveled south and visited both Cuba and Soviet embassies. Intelligence agents recorded his phone calls, photographed his movements, and monitored his interactions. He allegedly met with Valery Kostikov, a KGB officer linked to assassination operations. But here comes the part that begins to unravel everything. An internal FBI document confirmed that Oswald was impersonated during some of these calls. The voice on the recordings didn't match the real Lee Harvey Oswald. Someone was pretending to be him, communicating with foreign governments, using his identity, while the CIA watched. And that evidence was never presented to the Warren Commission. It was buried, suppressed, erased from the official timeline. Because if Oswald was being monitored, impersonated, and manipulated, then he stops looking like a lone madman and starts looking like a pawn. The files also reveal that Oswald crossed paths with CIA-funded anti-Castro groups just months before the assassination. These groups were already receiving tens of thousands of dollars each month from American intelligence. He debated them publicly, clashed with them physically, distributed pro-Castro leaflets using an address tied to an anti-Castro operation. A strange contradiction. A man promoting Cuban communism, using the same headquarters as Cuban opposition groups financed by the CIA. Nothing about this is accidental. Nothing about this is random. Yet, after Kennedy was killed, none of the context was disclosed to the American public. None of the surveillance. None of the intelligence contact. None of the contradictions. Instead, the nation was handed one simplified explanation and told to swallow it whole. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. But if that were true, why were 3 senior CIA officials later caught lying under oath about their knowledge of Oswald? Why did they deny surveillance that documents now confirm? Why did the agency conceal the identity of officers who interacted with him? And why did they actively obstruct congressional investigations decades later? Because the truth wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. Not to the public, but to the institutions meant to protect it. The shots that killed John F. Kennedy echoed across the world, but the silence that followed inside Washington was even louder. Within hours of the assassination, federal agencies had already begun shaping the narrative, not to uncover the truth, but to control it. Evidence moved, testimony shifted, key material vanished, and the official machinery of the United States government went into protection mode. Not for the president, but for itself. Let's start with the men who knew the most. 3 senior CIA officials would later be proven to have lied under oath about their knowledge of Lee Harvey Oswald: James Jesus Angleton, Richard Helms, George Janides. All 3 testified that they had little to no knowledge of Oswald prior to the assassination. All 3 were contradicted by the very documents now released in 2025. Angleton, the CIA's counterintelligence chief, oversaw the surveillance of Oswald's mail. He denied this under oath. The records prove he was lying. Helms claimed the agency had no significant file on Oswald. The records show an extensive intelligence profile existed before JFK was killed. Janides acted as a liaison to Congress during later investigations and never disclosed a critical detail: that he personally ran the CIA-funded group that had direct confrontations with Oswald months before the assassination. This wasn't oversight. It was orchestration. And in 2025, the CIA quietly admitted that Janides' involvement was part of a covert operation to obstruct congressional investigations. Let that sink in. A U.S. intelligence agency acknowledged that it interfered with a murder investigation into the assassination of an American president. Not in 1963, not in the 70s, but across decades. Now, let's talk about what disappeared. The first phone call between President Lyndon B. Johnson and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover following Kennedy's murder was erased. The recording gone. Only a transcript remains. Autopsy photos, some are missing. Original medical notes, altered. Bullet trajectory data, revised. Eyewitness statements, contradicted and buried. Even Castillo declassified memos show that evidence from Parkland Hospital conflicted sharply with the official autopsy findings performed at Bethesda Naval Hospital by pathologists who had little experience with gunshot wounds. Over 40 medical professionals described a large exit wound from the rear of JFK's head, suggesting a shot from the front. But the official record insisted the fatal shot came from behind. Why? Because a shot from the front means a second shooter. And a second shooter means the entire narrative collapses. Then there are the coincidences that refuse to behave like coincidences. On the exact same day Kennedy was shot in Dallas, a CIA officer in Paris was meeting with a Cuban intelligence asset to deliver a poison pen device intended for the assassination of Fidel Castro. The same day, the same hours, a sitting U.S. president is murdered while a covert assassination plan against a foreign leader is being advanced by his own government. And yet, we're told to believe that these events are entirely unrelated. Documents released in 2025 also confirmed a massive mail surveillance program. Hundreds of CIA employees opening American mail, tracking U.S. citizens, indexing names linked to the Soviet Union. Oswald was on that list. He wasn't invisible. He was being watched, which raises the most frightening question of all. If they were watching him, if they knew his movements, if they monitored his contacts, how did he manage to assassinate the president? Either the CIA was catastrophically incompetent, or they weren't trying to stop him. And that is where the story turns radioactive. Because buried beneath all of this isn't just negligence, it's coordination, a pattern of obstruction, a pattern of narrative control, a pattern of silence forced through power. And the 2025 files don't scream conspiracy. They whisper something more unsettling, that the American people were never supposed to see the entire picture. Not because they couldn't handle it, but because institutions responsible for protecting democracy were partially responsible for the lie. And the deeper you go, the clearer a single truth becomes. The assassination wasn't just covered up. The investigation was engineered. When governments lie, they rarely do it with a single sentence. They lie through patterns. And the newly declassified JFK files reveal patterns that were never supposed to align so cleanly. Start with Lee Harvey Oswald. We are told he was a lone, unstable Marxist drifter, a nobody who somehow pierced the heart of the most protected man on earth. But the files tell a different story. Oswald defected to the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War, and somehow returned to the United States with minimal resistance. He offered classified military information. He was trained at a sensitive U-2 spy base. He was monitored by intelligence agencies. He was indexed, tracked, profiled, and yet left free. Even more unsettling, he surfaced in places shadowed by intelligence operations. New Orleans, Mexico City, the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, the same address shared by anti-Castro operations, the same streets where CIA-funded Cuban exile groups operated, the same circles where propaganda and psychological warfare were already in motion. Oswald didn't exist in isolation. He existed in the crosshairs of intelligence ecosystems. Now, remember this? A CIA-backed Cuban exile group physically confronted Oswald in public months before JFK's assassination. He debated them on radio. Their leadership reported to CIA handler George Janides, a man later assigned to assist the congressional investigation without disclosing his prior role. This wasn't coincidence. This was proximity. Then the messaging machine activated. Within hours of JFK's death, the same CIA-funded group launched a media campaign blaming Oswald and framing him as a radical communist acting on behalf of Cuba. The narrative was built faster than the questions could form. And it worked. Now, let's examine another pattern. Oswald was allegedly armed with a single rifle. He fired 3 shots. 1 bullet caused 7 wounds. Another struck the president's skull at an angle that defied witness descriptions. A third missed entirely. But dozens of witnesses described the sound, the smoke, the trajectory of gunfire from the grassy knoll, a position excluded from the official story. Police ran to that area first. Why run toward danger if no danger existed there? And here's where the pattern sharpens. Every major line of inquiry that suggested multiple shooters, intelligence involvement, or operational complexity was either dismissed, diluted, or erased. Witnesses changed their testimony. Evidence chains were lost. Key figures died in suspicious circumstances. And files vanished for decades. Not because the truth was unimportant, but because it was inconvenient. Now pair that with the most chilling pattern of all. The same agencies that failed to stop the assassination also failed to investigate themselves afterward. Instead, they investigated the narrative. They polished it, streamlined it, simplified it. They turned instability into closure, and closure into history. The newly released documents don't directly say the CIA orchestrated the assassination, but they reveal something more dangerous to institutional credibility. They knew Oswald far better than they admitted. They tracked possibilities they publicly denied. They obstructed oversight for generations. And every time an investigator got too close, the door quietly closed. In the world of intelligence, patterns aren't random. They are architecture, designed, maintained, defended, which begs the question that refuses to die. Was Lee Harvey Oswald the assassin, or the most convenient redirect in American history? Because when every thread points back to the same hands, the same agencies, the same structures, the issue stops being whether they pulled a trigger and starts becoming whether they positioned the gun. Here's the part every documentary softens, every classroom avoids, every official timeline dances around. Because the most disturbing truth about JFK's assassination isn't who pulled the trigger. It's how aggressively the system protected itself afterwards. The newly declassified files don't reveal a smoking gun. They revealed something far more destabilizing. A choreography of suppression so methodical, it feels rehearsed. Let's begin with that phone call that vanished. The very first call between Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover on the day of the assassination was recorded. That tape should have been preserved as historical fact. It wasn't. It was erased. Not misplaced, not corrupted, erased. Only a transcript remains, a filtered echo of what should have been raw history. Now ask yourself, what would justify deleting the very first conversation that shaped federal response to the murder of a sitting president? Then consider the thing they still have not fully released yet. George Genaide's personnel file. A man who secretly ran a CIA-funded group that publicly confronted Oswald. A man later assigned to assist Congress in uncovering the truth about the assassination without disclosing his involvement. His records remain partially sealed, not for national security, but for institutional protection. And it doesn't end there. 14 paper documents and 6 audio recordings related to the Kennedy assassination remain unaccounted for. Not classified, not redacted. Completely unaccounted for. Lost inside the same system that claimed transparency. Then there are the autopsy photographs and x-rays. Multiple eyewitnesses described a massive exit wound at the back of JFK's head. Official photographs show something different. Medical personnel contradicted each other. Forensic paths were abandoned mid-exam. Some images simply never surfaced. Ask yourself why a government that can catalog every atom on a battlefield cannot preserve the medical evidence of its own slain president. Because preservation was never the goal. Containment was. And finally, the most haunting contradiction of all. At the exact hour JFK was being executed in Dallas, a CIA operation was active in Paris, handing a poison pen device to a Cuban official to assassinate Fidel Castro. The President of the United States was being murdered, and his own intelligence machinery was coordinating another assassination attempt abroad. That is not chaos. That is an institution moving forward, uninterrupted. Here's where the story becomes more dangerous than any theory. The files don't prove a mastermind. They do not establish a governing hand behind the gun, but they do prove something more corrosive, that the American people were given a story for comfort, not for accuracy, that intelligence agencies obstructed oversight on purpose, that high-ranking officials lied under oath, that evidence was concealed, altered, or delayed, that secrecy outlived the men who created it. And perhaps the most unsettling realization of all, you don't need a grand conspiracy for any of this to be horrifying. You only need a system more loyal to itself than to the truth. Because whether Oswald acted alone or as a part of something larger, the cover-up was not fictional. It was documented. It was intentional. It was government policy. So we arrive here, at the silent edge of American history, not asking who killed Kennedy, but why we were never allowed to fully know, why files remain hidden for 6 decades, why lies were layered with bureaucracy, why truth was rationed in fragments, and most importantly, if they could do this then, what are they protecting now? This wasn't about solving JFK. This was about exposing the mechanism that buried him, and the uncomfortable reality that the most powerful institution on Earth decided the public could not be trusted with the full truth. Not then, not now, not completely. The assassination of John F. Kennedy didn't just end a presidency. It revealed a fracture between power and transparency that still exists today. Because Sometimes the real conspiracy isn't who pulled the trigger, it's who rewrote the story afterwards, and who made sure it stayed that way. That's all for this episode. Take care.